COP30 has just wrapped up in Brazil, as we all know. It opened with controversies and it closed with controversies. I can't say that I paid much attention, but I was interested to see modern Western civilization's machine of climate propaganda, as directed by the global ruling elite, co-opting itself towards nonsense. There are hundreds of shameful stories coming out of COP30 in planning, attendance, and the events themselves. But the top story appears to be that the term fossil fuels was successfully disappeared from the final COP30 text. Thankfully, or perhaps unfortunately, who knows these days, we are well and truly in an era of global wartime propaganda. And so this continuous committed faux pas was simply left as is. 2025 was the year that the United Nations completely lost its credibility in the eyes of the global majority, particularly in the global south. So it makes sense that it is in 2025 that the mangled wreck of the UNFCCC mechanism crashed and burned in what little that remains of the Amazon rainforest. It came at a time when the US war machine is literally poised to regime change Venezuela by covert or overt means. Although many Colombians and Brazilians are supportive of Venezuela and would wish their armed forces to support the defense of Venezuela in the event of war against the US, geopolitical entanglements seem to dictate that Colombia and Brazil assist the Western plot to crown Machado Queen of Venezuela. She giddily committed at the American Business Forum in Miami a few weeks ago to open up Venezuela to foreign corporate interest, primarily to profit the same elite US-based Latin American community who are the very folk investing in US intervention. Smells like sustainable development? This is absolutely what it takes to uphold empire. And this was the context of COP30. How was it for you experiencing it from within Brazil?
My expectations for any COP is already extremely low, but as I have been following up more closely, I think it is still super disappointing, but I think at least, as you said, it makes every year, I think it becomes clearer how the UNFCCC apparatus is struggling to maintain relevance. It's softening its language, avoiding structural commitments, navigating geopolitical theater, rather than confronting the crisis with the urgency it demands. And I think this year, this was really, really clear. And it was interesting to see the own contradictions and ambivalences in Brazil hosting this as well, because you see the celebration of Amazonian leadership happening alongside continued expansion of agro-industrial power, infrastructure deals, security logics, the state's desire to look attractive to the same extractive capital it denounces. This is very common, and Fanon have talked about this extensively around how he positions and talks about the national bourgeoisie in post-colonial states. He talks and describes how this national elite he talks about newly independent countries, but I think that is still the case, how they often reproduce colonial structures rather than dismantling the structures because they lack the capacity or desire to transform the economic base because they benefit from it. So they position themselves as kind of intermediary between international capital and local resources. And I think we can see this happening here, where the state kind of sought legitimacy on the global stage, hosting this major climate summit, speaking the language of environmental leadership, while simultaneously ensuring that nothing would change or threaten the agro-export model, the mining concessions, the flows of foreign investment that sustain this elite power. So in parallel to that, indeed, I saw a lot of presence of indigenous people, quilombola, local community leadership in counter institutions emerging inside the event itself. challenging the carbon market, false solutions, extractive green development, but I'm also very, I don't know, I tend to stay cautious there because I know how much in these conferences, I can't say for sure what happened there because I wasn't there in person. I didn't see the dynamics or how these things were happening. I just watched some interviews online and some social media covering. But I think it's also very dangerous to bring indigenous communities into these conversations if they are not prepared and if they come with this kind of seeking of having a space to be heard and to gain visibility and things like that, because I think sometimes the naivety on being on these places can turn them into highly co-opted forces, especially what I see the most is indigenous peoples going to these conferences, gaining a stage to talk about it's so I get so pissed with this. It's like you have this global north people who have all the resources and power to make change, and then you bring an indigenous person to the stage and you are like, oh, can you please give us solutions to the problems we created and that you are suffering directly. And then they see that as an opportunity to like gain visibility for their community, but the only thing that they get out of these conferences is like invitation to more conferences and nothing changes for them. The harm doesn't stop. So I don't know. I also feel a bit conflicted with this presence of indigenous communities as a big win. Yeah, so these are my general impressions on following what's been happening here, also from national media coverage and things like that.
Yeah, I think something that I started to see as different from previous COPs was receiving emails from different environmental networks in Southeast Asia and outside of Southeast Asia who sent out emails saying like, hey, we are attending COP this year. We know that COP doesn't work, but we're going anyway because it's where a lot of other activists that we would like to grow our relationships with from other parts of the world are going to be. And so they kind of use it as a side COP event. So there's like
Mhm.
the actual COP, which is like the hegemonic one, and then there's kind of like this activist COP. And I don't feel conflicted at all about COP, whether it's like the main COP or the side COP, because to me, it's the whole thing is just charades. Like, why, why does any of this even happen? Because the whole thing is an economy that is upholding colonial sustainability. Whether you are in the hegemonic branch where the states are negotiating, or you're in the activist branch where there's so-called international solidarity happening, whatever that is because it never seems to go anywhere and nothing ever seems to happen. There are no strategies that are possible because the reality is the funding for all of these activists to go to COP come from hegemonic institutions from the West. Very few of them are actually self-funded because where else is the money going to come from? And they have very specific agendas when they go to COP. They have very specific types of topics that they are allowed to talk about or not allowed to talk about, otherwise they're going to lose their funding. So these types of events are, whether it's the side COP or like the anti-COP, like the ones outside of the building protesting, etc. I feel like this just continues to legitimize colonial sustainability because if it wasn't important, if you want to stop legitimizing it, then make it irrelevant. Why is it so hard? I don't understand. After so many years of activists coming together for international solidarity, to just do your own event and make it more accessible by it being online and more compelling by actually discussing real things with real organizing, real strategies, because that is what I miss, honestly. As somebody who's been watching cops devolve into this bullshit over the years, and then activism just kind of stays powerless, which like makes no sense. because of the gaslighting. Again, mechanisms that we all know and we can predict from miles away. The gaslighting, the fake news, the propaganda, and the funding. That's the biggest thing. So to have states use this as a way of yet another form of like morality, human rights type based soft power projection on climate, I mean, what else can you ask states to do? That's literally how like governments make themselves look good in try to in the back rooms negotiate with other governments for literally the very opposite things, right? That's something that states do. So why would we expect otherwise? But for the activists, especially when we expect them to have some sort of ethics, morality, integrity, respect, let alone for each other, but like yourself. I don't know. Like I don't tend to respect people who kind of pride themselves on attending like how many COPs or being at the front of the protesting line, like shouting at Macron or whoever going into the building, like, okay, good for you. You want a trophy? Or I don't know, what do you want? Because nothing changed and you don't have a strategy. You have some new context in your Telegram.
Well, there is that old propaganda tactic of talk good or bad, but talk about me. I think sometimes this approach of let's go there and um, meet the side organizations or use it as a space to convene. I think it is exactly as you said. You are, even though you are going there by another purpose, you are still legitimizing and giving attention to this thing instead of just, boycotting it and making it irrelevant, as you said. And I think the digital presence or hosting a hybrid event or online event that would bring more people in, it's such an important part. And I totally agree with what you said around just creating your own thing instead of depending. And so many resources should go there, and money spent and time spent, and for what? Like, yeah, I think
Yes.
it's crazy.
COP is about co-optation. It's about proximity to power. That's what it sells. When really there's this big firewall that protects power in the first place. And it gives everybody else this illusion of like making impact or whatever. It's narcissism.